Hope you're all having a really good weekend. This video will be posted Saturday night, and it will run through 9:30 on Monday morning. I've been asked to extend that, and I just wanted to make sure that I extended it as long as I could. I have class at 9:40 on Monday, so I need people to have watched this by the time I teach this. So it's going to be available now till 9:30 on Monday morning. All right. I don't have a warm and fuzzy over everybody's understanding of nested for loops. They're really important going forward. So I'm going to spend a little time here. I'm going to call this nested for loops demystified. I've noticed that some people really do understand what goes on inside here. Some understand enough to sit down and get their code to work, but I don't feel right now like everybody's, thumbs up for a test. And we do have the midterm coming on Wednesday. So if you don't understand nested for loops, please take the time to really look deep into this video, take some notes, and make sure that you understand. If you can walk through this code and know what happens through every iteration, you all will be fine for the test. All right, let's walk through this really slow. I've got the screen broken out a little different. I got the code over here where we can look. The code's obviously not going to change. We're going to track the variables over here on the right. As the variables change, increment, we're gonna keep up with them, and we're gonna put the output. You can see a C out down here. With what this sees out, we're just gonna type in this text box down here. So let's walk through this really slow. Here I declare two integers, rows and columns, calls. Right, I see out to the user, please enter the number of rows, enter the number of columns. So this user enters 3 and 3. These numbers won't change. These two threes are used inside of the two nested for loops, the inner and the outer, or I should say the outer and now the inner, as limits. Okay, it's going to count up to this limit. Basically, the two numbers we entered here now are the limits inside of these two for loops. All right, now we're down. Now we're getting ready to start into the outer for loop. Inside here, we declare an integer I equals 1, right? And then we check the conditions. Is I less than or equal to rows? We look up here. Yeah, it's less. At the end of this for loop, which is basically down here, right? It's going to increment. That's what the I++ means. But for now, I equals 1. Okay, and we're starting to progress down through our for loop. And the first thing that happens is the inner for loop. So inside this inner for loop, first thing we're going to do is declare a variable j, an inner variable j, and we're going to assign it the value of 1. Okay, one is less than columns because columns 3, and j is going to increment at the end of its for loop, which is right after the cout statement. I'm not going to keep repeating this over and over again. I just want you to understand it once. So j will keep incrementing at the end of this. So let's update our variables. I equals 1 and j equals 1 as we start into the inner for loop. Cout set with left. I'm not going to go over that each time, but that's just for some spacing issues. And then we're going to cout I plus j. Right now, I plus j is 1 plus 1. It is 2. Now we're at the end of the inner for loop. So the first thing we want to do at the end of the inner for loop is to increment j. J now equals 2. We go back up. 2 is less than, follow my cursor over here, 2 is less than columns, 2 is less than 3. So we're going to do this whole thing again. I plus j now is going to be 3. Okay, we go down to the bottom of the for loop. J increments again. J is 3. We go back up here. 3 is less than or equal to columns. Columns is 3. So yeah, this condition is being met. So we're going to do this again. We're down inside the nested for loop down here. I plus j. We're going to add I and j together again, and we get 4. J increments. J is now 4. And let's go back up and test this again. Is 4 less than or equal to 3? No. Now it drops out. It drops out of the inner for loop. It's done. The inner for loop is done for now. And then we're going to go up and see out. What that does, see where my cursor is? We go to a new line because now we see out end L. All right. Now we go back to the beginning of the outer for loop. Now we're back to the top of this. Well, I'm sorry, before we go to the top of it, we have to be at the bottom of it, which means that the outer for loop, is going to increment to 2. So now we're back up here, which basically means we're going to be in row 2. 2 is less than rows. 2 is less than 3. So now we're going to start back down into the inner for loop again. So the inner for loop, we're back at it again. Now it changes I back to 1. I'm sorry, j back to 1. J is back to 1. And we're going to work through this again. So put the cursor here. I plus j now is going to equal 3. We go through this. We increment j again. J is now 2. 2 is less than columns. All right, we get down to the meat again. I plus j now equals 4. We get down to the bottom of the inner for loop. J increments again. It's 3. We go back up to the top. 3 is less than or equal to columns, right? So now we add these together again. Equals 5. J increments again to 4. Then we go back up to test it. 4 is not less than or equal to columns. Okay, I hope you see that. Then it goes down, finishes off the for loop. This is done because j is not less than or equal. J is not less than or equal to columns. Then we see out. Watch the cursor again. We do another inline, end L. Then we're down at the bottom of the for loop. Then what happens now is I becomes 3. It's incremented right here, which says it does at the end of the for loop, nested for loop. So we go back to the top. We start through it again. So as you can see, the outer is the rows, which we talked about the other day. And the inner is the columns. So as you can see, we're going to go through this again. All right, we get through here and we go through this inner for loop again. I'm not going to talk through it again. And then we're going to end up with 4, 5, and 6. So we will have did our 3 rows of 3 columns and did the working mechanism, which was what's inside. The real work is always done inside of the inner for loop. That's where the work is. Just outside of the inner for loop, there's usually a C out to start the new row. The inner for loop, what you got here, works its way through a row. Then you do an inline. You're working your way down through the outer loop. You're going to do the next row. You do an end L, and then you work through the inner for loop again. Okay, so it just keeps releasing. The outer for loop releases to the inner for loop. It does all of its work. The inner for loop does all of its work. Then we end L, which means a new line, and then we do the work of the outer. So basically, it's just the outer for loop does the rows, and the inner for loop does the work, and basically keeps track of the columns. We're going to be working into arrays in about 3 weeks, and arrays are a lot like cells here in Excel, and you've got to be able to keep track of them. So the thing I would suggest is look at this code, be able to walk through it like I just did for this, and be able to trace out how the variables change as you walk through it, and how the program updates. All right, the question for this video will be about a nested for loop. If you've got any questions, please ask me on Monday. Monday is going to be a study session for Wednesday's midterm. If you still don't understand this, we can get aside and go to the board. We can work our way through one. I can make a different example, but it's really important that you understand this. All right, guys, I hope you have a good rest of the weekend, and I'll see you at Monday.